Welcome to Spotlight on Six Star Cruises. I'm your host, Karen Worrall, cruise and destination expert for Six Star Cruises. And in this special series, I'm exploring expedition cruising with Seabourn Cruises with my special guest, Robin West, who is the Vice President and General Manager of Seabourn Expeditions. Now, this episode is all about cruising to the Arctic. So let's begin by taking a look at some of the places you can visit when you're literally at the top of the world. Svalbard is a sovereign part of the Kingdom of Norway and is one of the most exciting places in the Arctic. You get to just 600 miles from the North Pole itself to experience the wonders of Svalbard in ultra-luxury on Seabourn Venture and Seabourn Pursuit. The dramatic scenery draws you in and enchants visitors with the rough, rugged mountains, the steep, icy peaks and mountains, and you spend up to 6 days exploring remote Svalbard in the realm of the polar bear, where you will experience wildlife in the high Arctic, looking for wildlife including puffins, reindeer, Arctic foxes, and walrus. Explore on foot, by kayak and zodiac to get closer to the action. On an expedition curated by Mother Nature and Seabourn's world-class 26-person expedition team. You'll hear glaciers calving close to you. It sounds and feels like thunder. The Northwest Passage is another of Seabourn's incredible expedition routes, including the Arctic. Here you travel the path of those long before you, as the adventure takes you through the historical Northwest Passage. You reach the Arctic and stand on the snow-covered ground there, visiting remote villages and seeing the dramatic and harsh landscapes of the high Arctic. Mountains, cliffs, and lakes await, as do whales, orcas, and the king of the Arctic, the polar bear. Experience amazing wildlife encounters as you explore on foot, by kayak and zodiac, while you paddle pristine waters and you follow routes from the age of exploration. Experience all the scenery, beauty, and wild splendor of the Arctic on your ultra-luxury expedition ship. I have my very special guest for this series back with me again, Robin West, Vice President and General Manager of Seabourn Expeditions. Robin is going to tell us about Seabourn Expedition Cruises to the Arctic. So hi Robin, thank you for joining me again. How are you today?
Thanks, Karen. Absolute pleasure. Arctic, yeah. Look forward to discussing it. It's a very large, fascinating area.
Absolutely. So cruising to the Arctic is a very special adventure. Well, what do you think is special about the Arctic, and what are your favorite things about it, Robin?
So traveling to the Arctic is what's nice about the Arctic is it encompasses such a large area. You know, we talk about the Arctic, we look at areas like Svalbard, we look at areas like the northern parts of Norway. We kind of consider Iceland part of the Arctic, although it's south of the Antarctic Circle, south of the Arctic Circle. But we kind of consider Iceland to be part of that. And then, of course, we move across to, Greenland and the high Canadian Arctic. And so the Arctic really encompasses a lot of areas, a lot of countries, to be honest. And so what I really enjoy about it is it's quite different. You know, when we go up into Svalbard, you've got flowering plants up at 80 degrees north, 79 degrees north. It's fascinating. And it's fascinating to see the seasonal change as you move through the Arctic. You arrive at the Arctic early in the season, you've got a lot of fast ice, there's maybe a lot of sea ice. And so there's quite a diversity. If you move across to Greenland, you've got some of the small Greenlandic villages on the west coast. On the east coast, you've got more of this rugged remoteness. You've got the ice cap pouring into places like the Greenland National Park, into places like Scoresby Sound. You're looking there for muskox, for example. So even the slight change in regions, there's also a bit of a change in wildlife. So it's fascinating. It also has some incredibly dramatic scenery, which is really very, very beautiful.
Wonderful, and I do agree. That's my impression as well. There's more variety in the Arctic, with slightly different landscapes, from the ice to the tundra, different wildlife in the different areas. And as you said, it covers so many countries as well, that there's quite a lot of diverse appeal to what you can do and see there, the flora and the fauna, the nature, the scenery. And being that far north is amazing. The furthest north that I've been so far is 71 degrees north up in Honningsvåg in the north of Norway. Norway. So I would definitely love to get further north and see more up there. So my next question for you, Robin, is where do you go on an Arctic expedition with Seabourn? Which countries and ports do you stop at? And what do you think the main appeal of each one of these areas is?
So with Seabourn, we do move through Norway. So, you know, the northern parts of Norway, as you mentioned, Honningsvåg, quite close to Honningsvåg. On the expedition ships, we actually, we come into areas like Hornvik or Skarsvåg, and we actually spend the morning at a place called the Storstappen Islands, which is home to almost 1 million puffins, white-tailed sea eagles. We do a zodiac cruise around the Storstappen Islands, which is really for you don't even have to be a bird enthusiast, for anyone who loves just nature. Being able to be out in and amongst tens of thousands of puffins and white-tailed sea eagles, kittiwakes, gannets, it's something quite special. And then, of course, from there we move up to halfway between Norway mainland and Svalbard. You have a place called Bear Island. The name, it was named Bear Island when bears were still found there. Unfortunately, the ice doesn't come as far south anymore, so there's no bears on Bear Island. But the southern part of Bear Island is home to about 1 million nesting seabirds. And we do a zodiac cruise there along the southern cliffs, which is absolutely one of the better zodiac cruises you can do anywhere in the world. And then, of course, we move up into Svalbard. Svalbard is very dramatic with beautiful fjords, high jagged peak mountains, hence the name Spitsbergen. But you're exploring with zodiacs, glaciers, you're coming ashore, doing tundra walks, you may be looking at old trapper huts. But of course, the big thing in Svalbard, of course, is you're looking for things like reindeer, Arctic foxes, you're looking for walrus, and of course, the thing that everybody wants to see going to the Arctic, of course, is a polar bear. And so, again, you're designing itineraries while in the field to best see all these different things and visit these places and bird cliffs and things like that. So, we kind of explore Norway, we go move north up into Svalbard, we then come in and move in a westerly direction. We explore one of the remote islands of Jan Mayen before coming across to East Greenland. East Greenland is fascinating. We're in places like Scoresby Sound, we're in the East Greenland National Park, very remote, very isolated, but some of the most dramatic scenery you'll find anywhere in the world. Opportunity to see things like muskox, opportunities to see polar bears, to do some guided walks. And then, of course, from there, we move around the west coast of Greenland, visiting a lot of remote, small Greenlandic villages, coming up into Ilulissat, Jacobshaven Glacier. From there, we come across to Baffin Island, high into Lancaster Strait, going as far as Beechy Island with the Franklin expedition. And then, of course, we move south and finish up in St. John. So our Arctic season tends to move from Norway, Svalbard, Iceland, Greenland, across to Canada, finishing up in St. John's. And that time period is roughly from about May, moving across to maybe early September as we move through multiple countries and across the entire Arctic region.
Wow, there is such a wide breadth of places that you're visiting in that area, and the amount of wildlife and scenery is just incredible. So, what is the atmosphere like in the Arctic? And is it even possible to ask that if it's so varied?
The atmosphere in the Arctic it's interesting. We spoke about how people get super excited in Antarctica. Um, and that is very similar in the Arctic. And I think what's always interesting with the atmosphere in the Arctic is when you're in Svalbard, for example, there's this, when are we going to see our first polar bear atmosphere on board the ship? And sometimes you get lucky, and on day one, you see a polar bear, and then you feel almost as like, and everyone settles a little bit. But if you're day 7 into a 10-day sailing in Svalbard and you haven't seen a polar bear, you can kind of cut the atmosphere with a knife. Everyone is like, okay, well, when do we get to see a polar bear? So it's so different to Antarctica. In Antarctica, as I shared with you, I can brief you tonight and say tomorrow there's going to be 60,000 penguins at Brown Bluff. I can't do that in the Arctic. Walrus haul out, and I can speak to another expedition ship today and they'll say, oh, Pulapinten tomorrow in Svalbard, we had 100 walrus. We arrive there tomorrow, they could be gone. Polar bears are constantly moving. They're constantly looking for food. They're moving through fjords, glaciers. They're swimming. They're out on the ice. And it's a little more challenging in the Arctic to get wildlife encounters. There are plenty of wildlife encounters to be had, of course. But of course, there's that atmosphere. People are wanting to see a polar bear and they're wanting to get a great photograph and have a great encounter. And, I think if I share a personal story, we were up our maiden voyage this year on Seabourn venture. We came up from Tromsø, we went through Norway, we went up into Svalbard, and we got lucky. We had a polar bear sighting on our first day in Svalbard, in St. John's Fjord. It was fantastic, good sightings, was interesting. The kayakers were about to get in the kayak, and one of the kayak guides was like, "There's a polar bear over there." And so just unexpectedly. And but anyway, a day later, we left Svalbard behind, and we do this on every Svalbard sailing. We take the ship and we head into the ice, and we go up to 81, 82 degrees north, and we put the ship in the ice, and we spend the day ice cruising, looking for polar bears or walrus, or to see what wildlife we may encounter on the ice. And we actually decided to leave the ship in the ice for the night. And that's, again, as we spoke about earlier, is having the wildlife control that encounter. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, a polar bear from about 2 miles away slowly walked all the way over to the ship within about 50 meters of the vessel, and spent time walking around, looking at the ship, moving around. It eventually moved maybe 100 meters away from the ship, sat down, and eventually spent some time scratching itself, and it eventually fell asleep. It was so comfortable in terms of our presence and in terms of it controlling that interaction. And so the Arctic is one of those areas where you really try to put yourself in the environment and wait to see what the wildlife encounters are going to be. And then once you have them, having the wildlife determine what that experience is going to be and how long that experience is going to be. And so what's interesting, I think you don't always realize, is one good polar bear sighting in Svalbard is much more rewarding than 60,000 penguins in Antarctica because it's so special to see a polar bear in the natural environment. Guests are seeing penguins every single day in Antarctica, so it's beautiful and it's fascinating and guests love it. But that moment of seeing an animal of such presence is something quite special.
Wow, that is really special. And as you say, the animals being the ones controlling these encounters is so important. And as you said, you can't always guarantee what you're going to see. The animals move around by their very nature. So it's trying to find them where you can, but also not disturbing them. So as you mentioned, polar bears are undoubtedly the most sought after animals to see in the Arctic area. But how likely is it to actually see one? And does the navigation team or the exploration team do anything to try to find them? Or do you just hope that you'll see them? Or are you in communications with other ships in the area who may have had sightings? So basically, how likely do you think it is to actually see one?
So in terms of seeing polar bears in Svalbard, for example, there's never a guarantee. That's why we are where we are. We're in nature. We spend 10 days up there, but there's never a guarantee. I think if you're guaranteed to see wildlife, that takes half the fun out of looking for them and spending the time in the environment. So there's never a guarantee. But to your point, everyone on the ship is looking for a polar bear. So the officers, yes, they spend a lot of time on the bridge. They sometimes notify us that they see one, but generally speaking, expedition teams tend to know roughly where to look for polar bears. If we're scenic cruise, the expedition teams spend a lot of time on the bridge. We have high-powered scopes on the bridge that the teams are looking through. We also have the GSS camera, the Cineflex camera that's being used on board. And so it's interesting because sometimes you also find polar bears when you don't want to see them. And to try and explain that a little bit. So what happens on a typical day, because of the presence of polar bears in Svalbard, for example, about an hour before we arrive at a destination where we would like to go ashore, we have the bear guards on the bridge with binoculars, with scopes, looking for polar bears as we sail towards the landing site that we would like to use today. That's purely just a safety precaution. And so they're they're looking for polar bears the entire time. When we go ashore, the bear guards are the first to go ashore, and they scout the area to make sure there are no polar bears in the area and to set up a safe operational perimeter. Sometimes during an operation, a polar bear might decide to slowly start walking over towards us, in which case we have to leave the landing site and take to the zodiacs. And then that wildlife encounter is from the zodiacs from a safe, protected distance and being able to see the polar bear. Because the aim with polar bears is you never, ever want to put them in a compromising position. Everything we do in the Arctic is to put ourselves in a safe position and to put the polar bears in a safe position. In terms of seeing polar bears, I've never done a Svalbard sailing without seeing one. Yes, the views may vary. You may have an incredible encounter. You may see 5 or 6 from a distance, but in all the trips I've done in Svalbard, I've never had a bad trip in Svalbard in terms of polar bear sightings. Now, again, we can't guarantee it, but there is a very, very good probability of seeing polar bears. And then, of course, seeing them responsibly. You don't want your visit or the opportunity to see a polar bear to have any impact on that animal's natural behavior. But for sure, there are quite a few polar bears in Svalbard. You can have some fantastic sightings. It's never guaranteed, but you have a very good chance of seeing polar bears in their natural environment in Svalbard, for sure.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for that detailed reply. It would be just amazing to see them. But of course, you have to make sure that you're safe and that they're safe and that they're comfortable. It's their house. We're just visitors.
Exactly. And I think sometimes the best experiences of seeing polar bears is actually many times from a ship.
And because the ships are so small, then they're less intrusive. Then that would also help to be a good way to see them, as it hopefully wouldn't make the animals feel intimidated in any way. So they're just going to act naturally.
For sure. And to some extent too, why the ship is a great platform to view polar bears from is because the experience and the level of engagement is then controlled by the wildlife. The ship becomes the platform, it's stationary, and the bear can control the engagement and that experience.
Definitely. Okay, I have one more question for you about the Arctic. What are your top tips and what do you recommend doing in the Arctic on an expedition cruise with Seabourn?
My top tips in terms of what to do, again, I would do everything that is offered. If the expedition team is offering a Zodiac cruise, if they're offering a landing, if they're offering a hike, I would really try to actively participate in as many things that are being offered on board the vessel. And that includes the submarines, the kayaks, joining all the lectures, because the activities that happen off the ship, that's only half of the product. On board the vessel, that's where the experts educate you about the destinations, about what you're going to see, about the wildlife. It's about getting dressed up and getting out onto the back deck and chatting with our ornithologist, Will Wagstaff, who's been to the area, 100 times, and getting those little tidbits of information that you don't maybe get in a lecture, but on a one-on-one talk. So, it's really engaging in the product as much as you can, every aspect of it, whether that's a Zodiac tour, whether that's a hike, whether that's a Zodiac landing, kayaking, submarines, going to recaps and briefings, going to the lectures, spending time on the outer deck. It's really everything together and the guests on board that make the effort to do all of those things, they come away with a completely different experience than someone who's more passive in terms of how much they engage in. And what's interesting on any expedition ship in the world, the more excited and more engaged the guests become in the product, the more the expedition staff are willing to give. And so it starts to really become a fantastic relationship in terms of the expedition staff getting excited about their field of expertise and guests learning about everything that the places have to offer.
That's fantastic, and I completely agree. The more you give to it, the more you get back. And this is a very active expedition. It's not a passive one. You're not just there watching it. You're not a spectator. You're part of it. So that sounds like an amazing way to see this incredible part of the world. So thank you so much for joining me again this time, Robin.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Karen.
And next time, we're going to take a look at some of the other destinations around the world that Seabourn cruises to as well. So thanks very much for now, and we'll see you all next time, and bon voyage.